Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. If you're a reef tank enthusiast, you already know that corals are absolutely the crown jewels of any setup. I mean, they're just stunning. But as the hobby keeps evolving, there's this massive question taking center stage right now. Where exactly are your corals coming from? So today, we're taking a really close, completely objective look at that core dilemma, choosing between locally grown and imported corals. Okay, let's dive into this.
So here's our roadmap for tracing these corals from the ocean straight to your living room display tank. We'll start with the great coral debate, then look at health and transport survival, followed by genetics and tank adaptation. After that, we'll hit conservation and traceability, cost and availability, and finally, making the right choice.
Section 1. The Great Coral Debate. Sourcing Matters.
I want you to just think about your own tank for a second. When you're out browsing for a new frag, do you automatically assume that local is always better? Or maybe you lean the other way, thinking, hey, if it's imported, it's got to be super rare and exotic, right? Well, the truth is, there's a huge, growing focus right now on reef conservation and supply chain transparency. Hobbyists everywhere are really weighing these two origins against each other. And just to be clear, we aren't here to pick a side today. We're just here to neutrally evaluate what a coral's origin actually means for its survival, the regulations behind it, and its long-term impact on global reef ecosystems. Section 2. Health and Transport Survival. Surviving the Journey.
Let's take a look at the actual physical journey of a coral because, honestly, it's an absolute gauntlet. Day 1 is the harvest at the origin. Then we get into days 2 through 5, which is all transit and shipping. Next up, it hits the retail system for maybe a week or two of acclimation, and finally, a month or so in, it makes it to your display tank. Now, the absolute critical stress points here happen in transit. Handling stress, shipping delays, sudden temperature swings, these are massive hurdles. Literally every single extra hour a coral spends in a dark shipping box completely spikes the risk of environmental shock. When we put them side by side, the direct health impacts are pretty eye-opening. Locally grown corals have a huge advantage when it comes to transit time. I mean, they spend way less time in boxes, which naturally means fewer temperature swings and just less handling stress overall. Plus, they're usually already acclimated to the exact conditions you'd find in local retail systems. Imported corals, on the other hand, are taking on massive globe-trotting journeys. Because of that, they're just way more vulnerable to shipping delays and environmental shocks. And here's the tricky part you really need to watch out for. That transit stress, it doesn't always show up right on day 1. It can subtly sneak up weeks later as really slow growth, receding tissue, or even a sudden vulnerability to nuisance algae.
Section 3. Genetics and tank adaptation. Fitting into your ecosystem. So, moving beyond that physical journey, a coral's genetic background completely dictates how well it's going to thrive in your specific tank. And the trade-offs here are fascinating. Locally grown corals generally have what we call local adaptation. Since breeders are often using regional parent stock, these corals are practically tailor-made for local conditions. Things like your standard light levels, temperature ranges, all of that. Plus, a lot of local farms track the lineage of their colonies, which gives you incredible consistency. Now, imported corals bring something equally amazing to the table, and that's pure genetic diversity. We're talking way wider varieties of species and crazy colors. But because they're coming from totally different climates and wild reef conditions, they definitely don't just automatically sync up with your standard home tank. That absolutely does not make imported corals bad. It just raises the bar for you, the hobbyist. It means you're going to need much more precise acclimation and some seriously strict water chemistry tuning to help them settle in. But wait, what about the paperwork?
Section 4. Conservation and Traceability. Protecting the reefs.
Okay, before we get into the legalities, we have to define the absolute gold standard for conservation in the hobby right now: aquaculture and propagation. Put simply, this means cultivating and reproducing corals in highly controlled environments to meet consumer demand, completely cutting out the need to pull them from the wild. This is so absolutely crucial to our sourcing debate because genuine propagation is the deciding factor for conservation, period, regardless of where on Earth the coral actually originates. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the documentation trails compare. Locally grown corals usually come with a super clear chain of custody. The paperwork generally stays right within the same country or region, tied directly to licensed propagation rules. Plus, local farms are often partnering up in regional reef stewardship programs. Imported corals, though, live in this wildly complex world of cross-border compliance. They need export permits, import authorizations, and you're relying really heavily on the transparency of the exporter. But here is the ultimate nuance to keep in mind. Imported can absolutely still mean beautifully and sustainably farmed. And local can totally still involve terrible, damaging sourcing if the local oversight happens to be weak. It literally all comes down to transparency and proving that the coral was genuinely propagated.
Section 5. Cost and availability. The buyer's market.
So what does all of this actually mean for your wallet and your everyday shopping experience? Well, locally grown corals generally give you very predictable pricing. Since the shipments are shorter and seasonal demand is managed regionally, costs stay pretty stable. You'll usually find them in smaller batches, and because they're raised so close to standard display conditions, it really cuts down on the trial and error phase for buyers. Imported corals, though, are where you go for that pure wow factor. The rare species, the crazy vibrant color selections. But their availability is definitely a lot less consistent. On top of that, the cost of imported corals usually includes these built-in risk premiums. You're basically paying to cover the expensive shipping and the super complex compliance needed just to get them safely across borders.
Section 6. Making the right choice. Your next steps.
So the crucial point is this. There really is no single best choice. It 100% depends on what your priorities are. If you want predictable acclimation and super clear local oversight, local is absolutely your go-to. If you're on the hunt for specific, super rare strains and wild variety, imported is totally worth it. The bottom line from the source material is pretty straightforward. Locally grown significantly reduces transport stress, while imported massively expands your variety. Both are completely valid, great choices for a reef tank as long as they're responsibly farmed, evaluated on their health history, and are truly aquacultured instead of wild collected.
To make sure you're setting yourself up for success no matter the origin, here's a strict pre-purchase checklist you really should be following. Number 1, always verify the coral's aquacultured origin. 2, do not be afraid to ask the retailer for the actual documentation to back those claims up. 3, check the recent growth and feeding history, like is this actually a healthy eating specimen? 4, confirm the exact current water parameters at the store, lighting, flow, chemistry, so you can gradually match your tank to those exact conditions. And 5, maybe the most important rule of all, quarantine your new additions. It's literally an absolute necessity, especially if you're building a mixed species tank, so you can monitor for any of those early warning signs of stress we talked about earlier. Building a thriving reef tank is an incredibly rewarding achievement, right? But it definitely comes with a real responsibility to the actual oceans we're trying so hard to replicate. So I want to leave you with this thought to mull over. The next time you visit your local fish store or you're browsing for frags online, do you know exactly where your reef came from? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy reefing.